Hello? Oh, it's working. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Richard Carrick, Chair of Composition Department at Berklee. We are thrilled about this three-day residency that we are having this week. It's with composer David Lang. David Lang is a very multifaceted and high-achieving in many fields of music, incredible composer, founder of Bang on a Can, and many of the offsprings that come from that, professor at Yale University. And he's here for 3 days working with the students, giving master classes, giving presentations, and we're just thrilled to have him here. So we are going to have a discussion tomorrow at this time in the same room, an interview on his composing process. But for today, David's here to speak about his music. And so we're thrilled to have that. And please join me in welcoming David to Berklee.
Thank you, Richard. I'd also like to say I was Marty Epstein's teacher when she was 18 years old. Because that is my truest claim to fame. I'm supposed to wander around with this microphone because I guess we're like filming. So normally I would just talk to you unmediated because there are not many of us, so I could do that. But I'm doing this for official reasons, just to let you know, not because I am fancy. So I thought I would just play you something. I don't know how many of you know anything of what I've done, whatever. So I thought I would just begin by playing you an excerpt from a piece that may or may not represent me. Then I'm going to play a little bit from my most recent piece and tell you how I got to it, the circuitous route by which I got to the thinking behind it. And then hopefully we will have some questions. So if you have questions for me, you know, my feeling generally is that your questions may be more interesting and more important to you than anything that I would have prepared to say. And as Richard mentioned, I am a college professor, so I can talk for hours about nothing. So it would be much better if you can guide me into something which is interesting to you. So just the general background is I went to college as a chemistry student to go to medical school. So even though I've been writing music since I was 9 years old, I never really expected that I would be a composer, right? All the time I was doing it, I thought, you know, I spent huge amounts of energy and huge amounts of time, and I was really serious about doing it, and I loved doing it, and it was really important to me. But I never thought that that was going to be my life, and even now I'm kind of shocked that I am a professional musician. It seems like the most unlikely thing that could have happened to me. And I think because of that background, I've always imagined myself a little bit as a kind of classical music outsider, as somebody who observed things that happen in classical music, not as somebody who grew up playing the piano from the age of 3 and took it for granted that they will be a musician, but as somebody who was looking at it going, what is that thing? Why do we do that? What is it that... why do people make those decisions that way? Why do we like that sound? So I think that kind of questioning and that kind of outsider status has gotten into everything that I've done in my entire life, and I like it. I mean, I like thinking that way. I like thinking that classical music is capable of doing all sorts of things that we don't ask it to do, because we didn't ask it to do that in 200 years ago, right? We have a tradition which is based on a series of models which are, you know, beautiful and powerful and worth venerating. But we don't really ask it to do much that we didn't ask it to do before. And musicians, as I'm sure you are all examples of, musicians now are much better trained than any musicians at any period in music history. You are at a school here which is in equilibrium with an experimental jazz program and is out in the world, and you have at your fingertips lots of different kinds of music. So I teach in a conservatory that makes believe that none of those things exist, that the only thing that exists is Schubert's string quartet, and that's what we should work on. And it's true we can play Schubert string quartets now better than probably Schubert ever heard them. But it's also true that musicians as people, we as people, are full of so many other influences, and it's interesting to try to figure out how to get those influences into our world. That was preamble. So now I'm going to play you my Schubert piece, right? So because I am looking at these pieces, trying to figure out what's going on, I got a commission from Carnegie Hall to do a project, and I had this idea that, one of the things I love so much about Schubert is the way the songs work and the way the vocal pieces work. I think Die Schöne Müllerin is the greatest example of storytelling and the most revolutionary act of storytelling in the 19th century, which I can go into later, but if you make me. But basically, I was trying to think about how to deal with song, because of course, art song has passed out of classical music into this other realm, right? We no longer have salons where we invite people and sing the kinds of songs that Schubert did with his friends. So where did this go? It went into the indie pop world. It went into, everyone is used to going into a club and seeing, a singer sing for 40 people. You have a drink, so everything sounds great. And singing something which is emotional and personal and supposed to connect with you, right? That idea has sort of left the classical music world. That idea, it's like we don't preference art song the way it was preferenced in the 19th century, although there are lots of great composers still doing it. That idea of the personal, small audience connection has moved into another part of the music world. So I had this idea that I would get people who were successful in the indie pop world, who had started as classical musicians and had given that up. And I would write something that would be in some way related to this tradition of the Schubert salon. So I found the singer Sharon Nova. So Sharon Nova, who has a band, My Brightest Diamond, but she went to school as an opera singer. Bryce Dessner, who is a composer in his own right and also founder of The National. But I knew him because he was a puny little graduate student at Yale studying classical guitar before he became a mega pop star. Owen Pallett, the violinist and singer from Arcade Fire. And then I also had Nico Muhly playing piano, who is appropriate in every world. And so I had this little band. And so what I decided to do was to go through every single Schubert song where death is a character. So, one of the things that's so interesting about songs like The Earl King or Death and the Maiden is that it's not just that death is a thing that happens to us or death is something that's hovering around people. Death is actually a character who speaks to us in our language. The song Death and the Maiden is in 2 stanzas, and the first stanza is the girl, the maiden, going, gee, it sucks to be me. And the second half is death going, oh, it's so great here. Come on, relax. This is going to be amazing. You're going to be here, right? It's going to be great. So the same with the Earl King, it's like the boy is being spirited away by his father on the horse. They're trying to outride death, and only the boy can hear what death is saying. And what is death saying? Oh, come here and, you'll play with my daughters. It'll be so beautiful, So I just wondered how many places are there in all the Schubert vocal musics and all the Schubert songs where death is a character speaking to us in our language. And I went through the German alphabetically, and I found 32 places where death actually says something to us. So I just took them in the order that they appeared, and I cleaned up the text so that all the text sort of went smoothly from one to the next. And I made a piece called Death Speaks. And I'm going to play you a video that I made of the of Sharanova singing the fourth movement.
Pain changes every shape. Once you are truly lonely, you will never be alone. Feel my hand, I feel you touch my cold hand. I will take you from her to your new cold land. I have chosen you, my only love. Those others, they search for you, but where they search, they will never find you. After the leaves fall, spring returns.
Thanks. Any questions yet? Okay, really start thinking now. Oh, yes?
Oh, so was the video recorded like with the track behind? I mean, like, is she only right because she sang in a studio and some stuff?
Yeah, so I had the idea to make a video where you would see her decompose a little bit while she's singing to you. So she's singing. So we shot the video like 6 times with 6 different makeups, and she's lip syncing to her own version. And then we went into the studio and then cross-faded them, so which turns out to be really easy to say and really hard to do. But yeah, so she's singing along with her pre-recorded voice.
Nice.
So, thanks. Yes?
How did this differ from you? So you said this was a commission from Carnegie Hall.
Yes.
Is this different from what you presented at the? Is this the exact project that you presented at Carnegie Hall, or was?
Well, this was the piece. This was one movement from the piece, but it didn't have the video, what I presented, right? So it was the live performance. So what happened was they had commissioned this piece called The Little Match Girl Passion from me, and that piece won the Pulitzer Prize. And then they were very proud of themselves that they had done that, so they said, we're going to do the piece again, and we're going to commission you to make a piece to go along with it. You know, like something, it could be a completely different piece on another subject. But I thought that piece is about this weird, I guess we're going to talk about it later this week, right, The Little Match Girl. But one of the things that's interesting about that, the story of The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen, is that the poor girl is begging and she's selling her matches on the street, and she dies, you know, a horrible, miserable death, totally unknown. But what she tells you in the story is that she, you know, lights these matches, and when she lights the matches, she's in the presence of her grandmother, and she's gone to this beautiful place where she's happy and she's warm and she's, you know, cared for. So it's like there's this real tension between what death means for the dead and what death means for the living. And so I thought I would look at that seam, and that's what made me think about the song Death and the Maiden, because that's the tension literally between the 2 stanzas in that song. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the piece that I premiered this year with the New York Philharmonic, called The Prisoner of the State. There's a long story of how this goes. Before I get to the long story about how I got to this piece, I'm going to do another long story about how I got to that long story. So when I was in my 30s, I guess, I'm very old, so that was a long time ago. But when I was in my 30s, I got this really great break. I got a commission to write an opera for Santa Fe. So Santa Fe is a traditional opera house, really beautiful. One of my teachers was the German composer Hans Werner Henze, who they loved, and they knew that I studied with him, and so they said, oh, well, he is an opera composer, and he says that you would like to write opera. So I said, yes, I actually would. I didn't really know what that meant, but I thought that could be really fun. So I went there, and I proposed, so Santa Fe flew me out. This must have been 1991 or something. So I went to Santa Fe, and they said, so if we commission you to write an opera, what would you do? And I said, oh, that's really easy. There's an opera I've always wanted to write, which is when I was, in my 20s, I was 21, I saw a production of Beethoven's opera Fidelio, and it was terrible. And I wanted to rewrite it ever since. And so you're going to commission this opera from me. I want to rewrite Fidelio. And the head of Santa Fe said, well, our audience already knows Fidelio. Why do they want another one? And that may prove to be a really good question, right? You know, which probably the jury is still out on that. So I ended up writing an opera on the least likely opera topic ever, which was the life and times of the Victorian art critic John Ruskin. Can't you just tell what a bodice ripper that is? You know, but it was really fun. I really had a great time. It was a really fun project. It was really amazing, and I really took it seriously, trying to do everything I could do in a traditional opera. So I had a giant cast, I had a giant chorus, I had spoken roles, I had children, I had a ballet in the middle. I did everything. I didn't have any water or fire or elephants, but I tried to do everything that you can do in an opera because, you know, opera is big, right? You know, you can do big things. I really enjoyed this process. The piece was really fun. And when it was over, what I discovered was that opera audiences are sort of like a religious cult. You know, they want you to not love 90% of what they do, or 95%, or 99% of what they do. They want you to love 100% of what they do. There's a very kind of rigid idea about what an opera should be, and many people in the opera world have that very rigid idea and are very rigid about enforcing their rigid idea. So what I got out of that experience was I loved doing this project. I loved the fact that at the core of opera is character, is the human voice, is using music to create the emotional life of someone and to make the emotional life directly clear to you. I love that. That is so powerful and so important and so meaningful. And I loved it so much that I wanted to figure out all the places that I could put that kind of experience that would not be in a normal opera house. And I started systematically thinking, where can that go, right? Where can that kind of opera experience go where you would not be looking for it, but where it would appear, where music can have that power, that connective emotional power. So the next opera I wrote, I was composer in residence at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, where I did all their theater music for 15 years. And the Kronos Quartet came to me and they said, we want to commission a piece from you, so what should it be? And I said, I'm composer in residence at this theater company. I want to make a piece where you are on stage and you are playing the music, and we make an opera on stage around you, but not with opera singers, with theater singers. So it's a theater project, but it's an opera, and there'll be one opera singer. There's one star, and everybody else is an actor who can sing, and you. So I made a project called The Difficulty of Crossing a Field, which was a really fun project. But again, it's like, it looks like an opera. It's been done in opera houses. It was intended to be a hybrid, you know, and that kind of hybridization is something that I've really been interested in. The next piece was a project, the record of which has just come out, actually, but it was a project I did a while back called Anatomy Theater, which is, I did a collaboration with a visual artist named Mark Dion, whose work is about kind of the history of scientific knowledge. And a theater company asked me to propose something. I went to Mark. I said, Mark, your things are very theatrical and no one has worked with you yet. So what's a project that you have done that might be convertible into an opera, or that might take advantage of people singing? So he said that he had just done a project in an original 17th century anatomy theater, the dissection theater in Holland. God bless you. So actually, there's a very famous Rembrandt painting called The Dissection of Dr. Kuyp. And there are a bunch of doctors standing around, and there's a cadaver, and there's an arm which is being dissected. So in that anatomy theater, he had been commissioned to make a piece. And his idea was, he's somebody, his claim to fame was he did a project for the Venice Biennale where he dredged a canal, and he set up a laboratory on the side of the canal. And so all of his workers, would show to work up every day in white laboratory coats. And they went through every single thing that they found in the canal. And they cleaned everything, they cataloged it, they preserved it, and then they built a very beautiful vitrine to display it. And so if you would see it over the course of the Venice Biennale, you would see this collection grow. And they found 16th century glass, and they found 18th century coins, and they found used condoms, and they found car parts. And every single thing that they found, they preserved it, they cataloged it, they cleaned it, they displayed it. And when the project was amazing. I went back several times, and when the whole project was over, the Italian government impounded it because it had, 16th century Italian glass in it, so it was an art treasure. But that's his work. His work is about doing an action which allows you to look at something from the history of science. And so he told me that he had gotten this commission from this anatomy theater, and his idea was that he was going to do a historically accurate anatomy lesson on a cadaver. And the health department in Holland said, you cannot do this on a dead person. So he said, okay, I will do this project on the next animal which dies in the zoo. And so he was hoping that it would be a hippopotamus or a giraffe. It was a goat. So he was telling me about how disappointed he was that he had to do this historically accurate 16th century anatomy lesson on a goat. And I told him, we could do this, and we could do it on a real person. And through the miracle of opera, this person that we do it on could keep singing. So we did a piece called Anatomy Theater. The text is almost entirely based on historically accurate texts from the 17th and 18th century. A woman, it's based on an actual true story, a woman who is a prostitute in 17th century England. She killed her husband, who was also her pimp. She killed her children. She is hanged by the neck, taken to an anatomy theater, and dissected in front of an audience, which pays for it. Because in those days in England, and also throughout Northern Europe, a lot of times people were dissected not for science, but for Christianity. So people were dissected by moral lecturers who would travel around, and they would go, this is the inside of what a criminal, this is what a criminal's body looks like. Your body, because you are upstanding, does not look like that. So the whole point of this was to say, this is the kind of thing that happens to criminals, this is the kind of thing that happens to sinners, and we show our distance from these people by doing this action. So that's this piece, Anatomy Theater, and we did that with the main character being a Broadway singer and some opera singers. So again, another hybrid. So I'm gonna go very quickly through a couple of others. I did a project on the High Line last year in New York called the Mile Long Opera. Did anybody see this by any chance? Okay, so this was a project where I lined up 1,000 singers, kind of some professionals, but mostly just amateur community singers. I gave each of them an individual song. So there was something, in the first person that they were singing. And everyone had an individual thing. So normally what happens in an opera is that you sit in one place, and all the set and the stage and all the people wander around in front of you. What happened on this was that they were all positioned, and you walked from the bottom of the High Line to the end of the High Line, and every person you walked by had a story to sing, and they would catch your eye. And those stories were written by the poets Anne Carson and Claudia Rankine. And that was really fun. Again, it's an opera. It's emotional. It is about using music to connect you, but it is not in the usual place. I did an opera called The Whisper Opera, And the point of this piece was we live in a world, this is a lot of talking, I'm really sorry, I apologize. So, but we'll get there eventually. You know, we live in a world where we are live performers, right? Who here is a live performer, right? You perform, right? So everybody here is involved in live performance. There's lots of music which is made just for recording. That's totally fine. But live performance and recording are completely different, and sometimes we mix them up, right? You know, everybody mixes them up. We don't really know which is what are we supposed to be paying attention to? Is the live performance the flawed version of the thing which can be recorded perfectly? Or is the recording you know, completely flawed simulacrum of a live performance? So I started thinking maybe I should try to make, since I love live performance, I should try to make pieces in which live performance is preferenced so much that the piece can't be recorded. So I thought I'm going to make a piece in which all the text is whispered so that you can't hear it, and so it can't be recorded. So what happens is that there's a specially designed set, and people, the performers walk by you as they are going on, so you get a little snippet of what's going on, but the person who is sitting a few feet from you has a different part of the story, and so there's no way that this piece can be recorded, because to record it would be to say that one of these versions is more important than all of them. And then I got kind of even more perverse about it, because I thought if you can't record it, and it is supposed to preference live performance, then I said, well, you can't record any of it, you can't photograph it, you can't video it, you can't do a concert version of it, it can only be staged. And when someone books the piece, there's no promotional material, so which is really fun. And then I did a piece for the Gardner Museum. Did anybody see this piece? Okay. So this was, the Gardner Museum came to me and they said, we have this problem at the Gardner. Has everybody here been to the Gardner Museum? Okay, so you know the story, right? A very wealthy person died in that house and said, it will never change. And so that's basically it. It's amazing. It's an amazing collection of things. And the rule of the house, the rule in the will of Mrs. Gardner, is that none of those things can be changed. None of those things are temporary exhibitions. None of them can be, you know, you can't change which room anything is in. The wallpaper has to be completely put back exactly the way it was found. So during the project, when we were working on my piece, they were actually renovating part of the wallpaper, and there was this gigantic year-long historical study about where the materials came from in order to get the pigments to make that wallpaper, because they're trying to be as accurate and as responsible to the will as they could be, which I think is amazing. But it makes for a special problem, which is that once you have seen the permanent collection, it does not change. How do you get more people into the building? So they asked me to come in and make some suggestions, and I said, well, you know, a really easy way to do that would be to have a piece of music that happens here that doesn't happen anywhere else. And so I made a piece of music where the tapestries in the giant tapestry room are the set and the stage and the character for an opera that you hear on headphones. And as part of that, I said, you know, because they record a lot of the things that they have there and they release them on their own label. And I said, look, you know, you're not going to be able to release this. You're not going to be able to do anything with it. You have to be absolutely pure to this idea, which is that the only way to hear this piece is to have the piece up with the headphones so that people have to be standing in the space looking at the tapestries. Again, the music makes these things into characters that you care about. It does the same thing that opera does, but it's not in an opera hall. This brings us back to Fidelio. So I probably have more pieces, but I've already talked too much. Do you have any questions yet? Okay. So here comes Fidelio. So one of the things that happens when you get older and people think you know what you are doing is that you start pitching your ridiculous things to people, and eventually they say, oh, you can do it, right? But after 40 years of having people tell me I couldn't do this piece, eventually after pitching it, someone said I could do it. A story that's off the topic of that, when I was a young composer, I got a phone call from a festival in Germany, and they called me and they said, Mr. Lang, we love your music. We will commission anything from you. It has to be the most courageous thing, and we will do this that no one else will do because we love you so much. What is the piece you have always wanted to do? So I said, yeah, this is really easy for me to answer. I will do a piece for 1,000 people yelling in the street. And the guy went, oh, we call you back. And eventually I did that piece because when you get older and you know what you are doing and you get a little successful, people think they think you're being serious, right? So I told that story at a party and everybody laughed, and then one of the people came up and was not laughing and said, I'll pay for that. And so then I had to do it. And it was really fun, and I'm really glad I did it. But, it had sort of become a story for so long that I forgot that I was going to ever get a chance to write the music, This Fidelio project is one of those stories where I proposed it so many times to so many people, and it had so many different people passing on it that I sort of gave up hope that it would ever happen. But lo and behold, a consortium was formed between the New York Philharmonic and 8 different European presenters, and I got to do this piece. So the idea of Fidelio, has anyone seen Fidelio? So, but you know the plot, right? So the plot of Fidelio, Beethoven is writing a piece in the spirit of the French Revolution. So it's after the French Revolution, and this idea of freedom, this very dangerous idea that people should be free, is floating around, and Beethoven is really, powerfully committed to this idea. He writes this piece, which is based on a French play, the French play about how a woman, her husband is a political prisoner. He's thrown in prison by an evil local magistrate. And his wife, whose name is Leonora, she takes the name Fidelio, meaning trusted, and she gets a job as a jailer's assistant trying to find her husband. And she, through some completely unbelievable machination, manages to free her husband. It's an amazing story. It has some of Beethoven's most beautiful music in it. It has one of the most beautiful things ever written by anybody. For those of you who don't know the opera, there's a quartet towards the very beginning where singers are looking at one other singer and singing what they think about them in a canon. It's one of the most beautiful things that he ever wrote. But there's some problems with this opera too. So the first one is just essentially political. How can Beethoven, living in a world that has kings and emperors, tell a story about how great it would be if we had no kings or emperors? How do you do that? How do you talk about someone standing up to power in a world where you do not have the agency to stand up to power? Beethoven does a number of things to get away from that, to sort of hide the fact that the core of this is a story about freedom. The first one is he hides this story inside an opera buffa tradition. And the opera buffa tradition is we have women dressed up like men, and we have them have their identities mistaken, and we can have women fall in love with them, and that is really funny. And we can have a bunch of hijinks around that. That's a tradition from 18th century opera, and everybody recognizes that. It's a comic opera thing. So we do that. So there's a huge part of this story at the beginning, which is about this mistaken identity. And in fact, that's what that canon quartet is about. That's so beautiful, is that the jailer's daughter falls in love with Fidelio, thinking that Fidelio is a man. Again, that's not on the topic of the political prisoner. Beethoven goes to great lengths to say that it's not happening in Germany, it's not happening in France. If the story were set in France, Beethoven would be saying, I identify with the French Revolution, I follow the French Revolution, I support the French Revolution. So it can't be French characters. It can't be in German characters, because if it's in Germany, he's saying, I wish this would be happening here. I wish we overthrew our government here. So this opera is set in some mythical place in Spain, because who cared about Spain, right? You know, it's like you're in Vienna at the time. Vienna, at the premiere of this piece, was occupied by Napoleon's troops. So how could, so the people who came to the first premiere of this opera about overthrowing an empire, were all, you know, Emperor Napoleon's troops. That's the first audience. That's the kind of tight wire that Beethoven had to walk. But the worst problem of the hiding, and the one that disturbed me so much when I saw this when I was 21, was because Beethoven is pulling his punches about the prison, he phrases every political problem here as what a woman will do to save her husband. So it's not about our relation to freedom, our obligation to each other, how to build a just society. It's all about what a woman will go through to save her husband. And in fact, at the end of this, when the prisoner is freed, Fidelio, you know, goes off with her husband. The chorus comes out, the happy chorus of all the happy townspeople, and they do not sing down with tyranny or up with freedom or how much we should love one another or can't we all be free. Instead, they sing, happy is the man who has a loving wife. If you have a loving wife, come sing with us. So if this had always been built up to me as being Beethoven's greatest statement about freedom, I was 21 years old, and I remember sitting there going, what happened to the prisoners? The most famous music in this piece is the prisoners' choir at the end of the first act. The prisoners come out, right? Fidelio lets them out into the sunshine, and just a ray of sun on their face turns all the muggers and killers and thieves into the greatest citizens ever. And they sing this very beautiful music. And it's really moving, and it's really incredible. And it really is one of Beethoven's greatest statements of freedom. And after that incredible moment, you never see them again. No one ever speaks of them. You never hear from them. You never find out what happens to those prisoners ever again. They're completely forgotten. And why are they forgotten? Because they have to get into their happy townspeople outfits for the second act. That's it. They need to change clothes and change who they are, so they will be townspeople at the end of the opera. So over the years, I just started thinking, maybe it's possible to go to the core of this piece, to go to the political prisoner part of this, to go to the social justice part of this piece, and say, what is on the topic from this original story, and get rid of everything else that's extraneous. So I went through and I cut the romance, I cut the mistaken identity, I cut the comic opera things, I rewrote that text, and then I hyperlinked what was left with texts from other things that might explain where we were. So, for example, the evil governor, the evil head of state in the original, he is just a cartoon evil person. He is just the most evil person. But I don't know if you have the same opinion, and I don't want to talk about politics because my piece is really not about where we are right now, although we do have children in cages at this moment, so it is kind of topical. But in my experience looking at the world, the evil people are much smarter and much more dedicated and much more together than we are. So I'm assuming you're not an evil person, so I'm including you in that. But you know what I mean? It seems like at least the world I imagine I live in, the good people are not nearly as organized as the bad people. So it's a little misleading to say, here is this evil character of Pizarro who comes out in Fidelio, and he's just a cardboard bad person that we can overthrow easily. He's somebody who knows actually how the system works a lot better than we do. So in my version, he comes out and he sings what's in the original libretto, that it's time to go kill the prisoner, and he orders the jailer and Fidelio to go off and dig the grave. But in my version, at that moment, he steps out of the action and looks at the audience, and he sings what he believes. And what he believes is the text from Machiavelli's The Prince, which has the very famous dictum in it: "It is better to be feared than to be loved." And so I do this with every moment in the piece where someone comes out and has to sing something and to explain where they are. So there's, when the prisoner introduces where we are in the prison, there's a little thing about, from Jeremy Bentham, who is the English philosopher in the 18th century who invented the idea of the modern prison, explaining why this is a great way to organize people, not just in prisons, but also in schools, in factories, in hospitals, and workplaces. This is a way of morally organizing people, where someone who has power watches over them and can oversee what they do to make sure they never do anything wrong. I wanted to know who the prisoners were, so I found a text from 1805 about all the crimes that you would be transported from London to Australia for. So these are contemporaneous crimes. So the prisoners do something they never do in the original, which is tell you why they are there. And those crimes are contemporaneous. I stole a loaf of bread. I stole a piece of cloth. I stole a lady's purse. So it's like that. So I went through the original, and so now I'm going to play you some music, okay? But, the last thing I'm going to say before I play you some music is it's with an orchestra on stage, right? So this is unusual, right? You would think it would be in an opera house because it's an opera. But remembering my stories of trying to get opera in places it doesn't belong or hasn't necessarily been too much, I thought if I did this in an opera house, people would think, you have taken something from our world and destroyed it and taken something away from it. Whereas I thought with an orchestra, if you do something in the orchestra world, it would be perceived as you have added something of value to our world, which is what I really wanted to accomplish. I'm going to show you a little bit about a little video that shows you just like 4 minutes of what different scenes looked like. So it's the New York Philharmonic and with a set built on it. And the music is from the end. And hopefully I can still get this. So the music is not synced with this at all, just so you know. This is just a promo that the New York Philharmonic made to just let people know that it exists. Okay, you get the idea. So I'm just going to play you 3 little excerpts from this, and then we'll be done. One thing that's really interesting is that we know nothing about the life of Leonora in the piece. We don't learn anything about her other than that she's a dutiful wife. We don't know how she feels. We don't know how she thinks. We don't know anything about where she was, what she gave up. You know, she had no life before this. And so I just wanted to begin the opera with her, because it seems like she's kind of this giant question mark in the original opera. So, so the opera begins, you know, the light comes on and there's that little spit that goes out into the orchestra. And so Fidelio, I don't call them Fidelio, I call her the assistant, because she's the jailer's assistant. I call the jailer, I call the prisoner, and I call the governor. So here's the assistant's opening aria. This is the way the opera opens.
I was a woman once. It was so long ago. I barely remember it, but I remember it. I was a woman once. I did what women do. I lived as women live. I felt as women feel. I dressed the way a woman does. I was a woman once. I wore my hair the way a woman does. I sang the way a woman does. I breathed the air the way a woman breathes the air. And I loved the way a woman loves. When they took my love away, I died the way a woman dies. I died the way a woman dies. I died the way I don't remember his face. I don't remember his name. I don't remember his love. But I remember I was a woman once.
said some things about Fidelio being not a successful piece, and I don't want you to think that I'm being as much of a heretic as I am, or as I could be, or as sometimes I am or want to be. Because Beethoven rewrote this piece 3 times. He was never happy with it. It has some problems which everyone always acknowledges as being problems. Oh, it has some problems. Fidelio has some problems which everybody always acknowledges as being problems. One of them is the way the theatricality of it makes the piece very wooden. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have my piece with the orchestra on stage is because traditionally, Fidelio is done more as a concert version than as a staged version. Because if you just hear it as an oratorio and you go, that is somebody singing something really beautiful, that works really nicely. Having the orchestra on stage was a way of sort of recognizing that there's that problem and that duality in the existence of the piece. But the reason why I bring that up is because even Fidelio's greatest supporters have problems with a particular aria that the jailer sings very early on. So one of the things that happens is that when the jailer's daughter is flirting with Fidelio, the jailer's daughter is, like trying to talk her father, the jailer, into supporting their marriage. And so, and Fidelio is just trying to get out of the conversation as fast as possible, right? So not giving much away. So the jailer sings this thing which is musically not interesting. I mean, it's a very clumsy aria about how much you need money in your life. And he sings it. It's a very funny, it's supposed to be funny, aria, but can you imagine other funny music by Beethoven? It's really hard to put your finger on what his funny music is. It's really unlikely for him to try to do this. And he's singing this very clumsy little aria to his daughter and prospective son-in-law going, well, if, you're going to need money because if all you have to eat is love, you're going to be hungry. It's a really problematic aria, and it always is very clunky. And if you are backstage with singers, they make fun of this aria because it's not one of Beethoven's highest moments. And again, no offense to Beethoven, I am not touched to fit the hem of his pants, but when I was thinking about should things stay in or should they go out, I thought actually one of the interesting things about the jailer is who is this character and why is he there and what does he think and what is his opinion here? He's totally complicit in the imprisonment and the potential death of this prisoner. The governor has told him in the original opera, go dig this guy's grave and then I'll come back and I'll kill him. And he's been starving him. The Pizarro has told him, give him less and less bread and water every day, starving him. His first entrance, Pizarro comes in and he goes, is the prisoner dead? Have you killed him yet? So he's totally complicit in this world. He's part of the machine which is killing this man. And yet he's the charming father, the kind of bumbling father of this girl. And at the end, when the crowds people come out, he gets to celebrate with everybody. He's there, singing along, right? He's a happy guy. He survives, right? That seemed not fair to me. That was not right. He's part of the mechanism that makes the torture of this man possible. So rather than get rid of this, I rewrote the text so it becomes his kind of, his discussion about why you need gold in your life becomes a kind of cynical description of what his role is there. Why does he have this job? Why is he helping the state torture and kill this man? It's because he needs gold.
In this world, without gold, you can't live. You can't be happy. Without gold, in this world, with gold in your pocket, power and love, power and love. Without gold, someone else will get the power and the love. The power and the love. Luck is a slave to gold. Love is a slave to gold. Life is a slave to gold. In this world, you pay for luck, you pay for love, you pay for life itself. When you see a man with luck, with love, with life, you know he has the gold, he has the gold. When you love someone, add what is in your empty pockets to hers. And if it's nothing, all you have is nothing. If all you have to eat is love, you will always be hungry. In this world, your true love, your real love, the love you hold the tightest in your arms, is gold. In your arms, in your purse, in your pockets, in your bed. If you want to live, you will need gold. When I get enough, I'll be gone.
And the last thing I'm going to play is the aria when the governor comes out and he sings, "Better to be feared than to be loved."
Better to be feared than to be loved. It is better to be feared than to be loved. Men are fragile, men are liars, men are cowards, men want money. When times are good, they will be yours. But if you need them, they will be gone. Better to be feared than to be loved. It is better to be feared than to be loved. Love is a bond that men will break if they can gain something by breaking it. But fear, the man who fears you better to be feared than to be loved. If you can't be loved, be feared.
So now we enter the question and answer session of our talk. I hope you have some questions. Yes?
Thank you. So I recall you saying that you started writing at like age 9 or so. I was wondering what your biggest influences were, primarily like your early influences on writing and composition.
Okay, so I became a composer by accident. My parents were immigrants, basically, and there was no music in my household. And when I was 9, it was raining at my elementary school, and I went to. They instead of letting us play on the playground in the rain for lunch, they put us in the auditorium, and to keep us quiet, they showed a movie of a Leonard Bernstein young person's concert. And everyone is throwing their food at each other, and everyone is loud and rowdy. And I thought it was the most incredible thing I ever saw. And they were playing Shostakovich's First Symphony, and Bernstein looked at the children in the audience and said, in the movie, and said, Shostakovich wrote this piece when he was 19 years old and became world famous overnight. And I remember thinking, I have 10 years. And so literally that day, I became the world's greatest Shostakovich expert. I borrowed instruments from friends in the neighborhood. My parents didn't want to pay for any lessons for me, so I would just borrow instruments and teach myself how to play. And I wrote pieces of music that were squiggles on pieces of paper. I studied Russian in college because of it, and I studied in Russia because of that experience. And when I went to interview for my doctorate, I went into my interview, and one of the professors said, oh, this is the guy who knows all the Shostakovich. And my entire graduate school interview was, why don't you sing the second movement from the Seventh Symphony? Why don't you sing the third movement from the Third String Quartet? I mean, that was my entire, oh yeah, and some ear training, and that was it, you know. So I sort of got, I didn't know that a composer existed. I didn't know what the job was. I didn't know what music was. I didn't know anything. But somebody had said, young people can do this, and it's interesting if young people do this. And so I became totally obsessed with doing it. The other thing which was really interesting about that, and I think really had a big influence on me, was I didn't get introduced, like my children all had music lessons, and they got, you know, like if you have piano lessons for a little kid, right, you know, and maybe you all had this experience too, the way you learn how to play music is somebody teaches you, this is how you wiggle your fingers, and we're gonna practice wiggling our fingers to this great music of the past, right? You know, so here's a really easy Bach piece or a really easy Mozart piece. And I remember watching my kids go through this, and I would go, they're getting two messages here, right? You know, they're getting this message, like here's the technical thing they're supposed to do, and they're getting this other message that they're supposed to worship at this shrine. Could we actually educate people to just get that message without that message? That might be interesting, you know. But I never went through that background. I never got the worship at the shrine part. I just got the composers are great part. And so after that moment, I became completely dedicated to people who were writing music right now, to how the most important thing that you can do in humanity ever in the world, in human history or in the future, is be a composer, about how important we are. And that's why I think I've spent a huge amount of time, you know, with things like Bang on a Can or the Bang on a Can summer program or my teaching at Yale or whatever. You know, I spend a lot of time with young composers because I feel like composers are cool. you know. I spend a lot of time with old composers too, you know. And I think that's why I never really learned to participate in the kind of battles that people my age went through, where people had ideology that separated them by going, this kind of music is better than that kind of music. Because I just thought being a composer was really cool. That's great. And when I was in high school, I played in the jazz band, I played in the orchestra, I played in the marching band, I played in the bugle corps. I actually was so nerdy that I would get to school early every day to play the bugle so they could raise the flag. That's how nerdy I was, you know. But I never thought that there was any difference between any composer in the world, because it had been introduced to me that composers are cool. So, and you are. Another question? Yes?
Hi. It seems to me that text is a very big part and a very part of your music that comes first or near the beginning of the compositional process. Can you talk about when you started using text in this way, maybe what inspired it, or how text inspires the rest of the compositional process of your music?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's really become like a hugely important part of my life. And it wasn't, text was something that I dealt with occasionally. When you write an opera, they have to sing something, right? So, you know, like when I worked on the opera about, for Santa Fe, I really didn't know how to focus my attention on the text. And I didn't do the text myself, so I had a collaborator for that. And I had done work in this theater company with songs, but it wasn't really a big part of what I did. What happened, which was very weird, was I wrote The Little Match Girl, and I learned a huge amount about how to work with text in that piece and what the relationship with music was. And I had this one incredible experience while writing that piece. I wrote something that was musically really amazing, that I really loved. Right, it was really beautiful. It was like of an order of magnitude better than I expected. I really loved it. And when I was working on the piece, I could never get past that movement. I couldn't get past it because it was so beautiful. And then I realized, you know, the only way to solve the problem with this piece, to make the piece work from start to finish, was to take the part that was the best part and get rid of it. Because what happened was, at that moment, you paid attention to how beautiful the music was, and that moved your attention away from the storytelling, and moved your attention away from the narrative, and moved your attention away from the ability to take something which moved seamlessly in a straight line from start to finish. And that was really hard for me. That was like a real kind of gut check, where I went, this is the best music in this piece, right? And I'm going to have to get rid of it, you know. I mean, I used it someplace else, right? So I didn't lose it, but that was when I realized that that actually my job as a composer was very different when I was working with text than when I was working just with abstract instruments or other ideas, right? So now what I think is, when I work with text, my principal responsibility is to be the reader of the text. My job is not to make music that calls attention to what a great composer I am, or all the funny things that I can do, or all the great things that the instruments can do. My job is to use the music so that I can convey the meaning of the text to you better. And that's been kind of like a revelation to me, you know, that it's like, that once you have text, you have a job. Like when you have, bless you, when you have an orchestra, you know, and you're writing a symphony or something, you get to decide how long something lasts. You get to decide, oh, well, now I'm going to bring the oboes in, they're going to do something amazing. You know, I mean, it's like you get to decide all these things. They're up to you. The minute you have a text, at least for me, my job is to be the most honest broker of what that text can be. So how do I make every decision to make the text more important to you? Anyway, and since then, it turns out I really like doing that. I really like thinking about text. So since that moment, I've been searching for more and more texts and more ways to do that.
So I also a young composer, and my dream is to write music for commissions. It seems like you've been really successful at receiving commissions and getting a lot of success with your commissions. So how did it come about that you started receiving lots of commissions, and how did that kind of start to roll?
Okay. The most important thing for getting commissions is to be part of a community of friends. The most important thing. So I think everyone thinks that the way to have a career is to have like hundreds of famous people, you know, that you don't know their names, but they belong to recognizable countries and organizations who have lots of success and fame and money, and they're gonna anoint you, and you're gonna get, you know, all this incredible work. But actually I think that may be true for some people. That's not what happened to me, and I don't think that that's the way one should live. You know, I think what you really need to do is you are part of a cohort of people. You help everyone else get better with what they do. They help you get better with what you do. Sooner or later, something good will happen to you, and you're going to hire all of them. So, sooner or later, something good will happen to one of them, and they're going to hire you. What happened to me, the big break that I got was I went to the Aspen Music Festival 5 summers in a row when I was in my early 20s. And one of my roommates won a prize, which gave her a Carnegie debut, and she commissioned a piece from me for no money to write on her debut. And I wrote that piece, and the concert was very successful, and as soon as she walked off the stage, I had work from all of her friends. And I have tried to pass as many things to the people who I am around, who I love, and who I respect, and who I work with. And when I try to work with someone else, I don't try to imagine who is the most famous person I can rope into my work, but who is the person who I'm going to want to have in my world. And you want those people to think of you that way. So, I mean, I know it's really tempting to think, you know, if I just had some famous person just give me a gig, you know, life would be great. But actually, you know, you're in a great position because you are all young, you're building this environment for you. So you are all coming up together. So, and you will build the world that makes sense for you. That's what I think.
So you have a lot.
One more thing. I also just want to say it's really important to talk about business. And it's really important to think about business and what your relationship is to the business of the world, because you know we're doing this thing. We're professional. It's for real. It's important to think about it. So that's a totally legitimate question, you know. And also you know what I tell my students is that the most important thing they have to do is be honest about what they want out of this career. It's totally reasonable for a student to come into my lessons and say, I want to write music which makes me super famous, and I want to make a lot of money, and I want a house with a swimming pool. And I feel like that's totally legitimate. I think once you are honest with yourself about what you want out of your field, then you can say, what are the rational steps I need to take in order to get that? You know, where is the part of the music world where I'm going to be able to accomplish my dream? So I'm not in the swimming pool part of the music world, but anyway, but you know what I'm saying? I didn't want it to make it seem like asking a question about business was off limits, because I think about it all the time, because I have to.
So you have a lot of theater and opera singer mixing going on in your pieces. I was wondering if you notate the different registers when you're working with singers.
Yeah, I notate everything. Yeah, I notate as much as I possibly can. So I think, you know, when you're working with people who have different abilities, then you want to be able to give them as much information as they can handle, and phrase it to them in the way so that they can make the best use of it. So there's certain circumstances where instructions will be more elaborate depending on what they need from you. one example of where the difference between writing for theater singers and opera singers came through was in the opera Difficulty of Crossing a Field, where I needed a chorus. You never know what people's vocal ranges are, and some people are not good at being able to tell you that. So things were not harmonized in 4s with divisi, but they were harmonized in 3. And the middle line was the catch-all for men and women who fell into that range. You know, you have to be aware of what it is that people can do. But your job as a composer is to ask as specifically as possible for what you need. If what you need, you know, needs to be addressed in a particular way, you have to figure out how to address it that way.
Hello. Your music in the past 40 years has changed a lot. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about if you're even conscious of anything that has brought about that change, and if there's a common thread that has gone all the way through.
I think the common thread is kind of looking at things and asking why we do them. I think that's the common thing. I think the thing that has changed is I wanted, when I was younger, to do a couple of competing things. You know, you're young and you want to show off that you know how to do things. So you want to write a certain kind of music that, you know, at least I found writing a lot of loud, obnoxious music was really fun when I was young because I was brash. I don't have to do that anymore. I'm not brash any longer. I also wrote pieces which were pieces that I thought were serious pieces that I was cloaking in a certain kind of humor because I felt like no one would expect that I, as a young, pup, would be capable of writing pieces which were about weighty things. So I had pieces like Are You Experienced or something, which is basically about the same topic as Death Speaks, but phrased originally as a kind of comic situation. And my wife refers to all of those as the formerly ironic David Lang. You know, but I think it's, when you are young, you don't really know what you're supposed to show, you know, like, I just remember when I was in graduate school at the same time as Aaron Kernis, right? So Aaron, who is, you know, one of my closest friends and, you know, and my colleague at Yale, and we were students at the same time. And so he's 21 years old and he's writing pieces. This piece is about the Iraq War and it's an hour long and it's about the seriousness of this and that. And he could handle that. You know, he was serious and he had the ability to do that in a piece of music and he had the desire to do it. And I felt like I wasn't really good enough to do that yet. You know, nobody would believe that from me. And so I had to try to figure out how to hide these things, you know. And so when I first started coming out trying to be a little more serious, you know, like, well, The Little Match Girl Passion, for example, got a bad review in the New York Times for the premiere because they didn't believe me, right? You know, the critic thought it was kitsch, you know, thought, oh, well, this isn't sincere because this is the composer who does all that loud, obnoxious music, and now here's a quiet, introspective, meditative piece that's supposed to be on a serious topic. How can we believe him, you know? But as I have been making more and more introspective and thoughtful pieces, I've enjoyed doing that. And I'm not saying that I'm not going to write any more obnoxious music, and certainly some of this opera is plenty obnoxious. But I like being able to, you know, not hide the fact that I'm trying to think about something serious. I think when I was young, I didn't know how to do that. Does that make sense? Yes. There are a lot of competing things for young composers. You don't know, like, which part of you should show and which part of you you're embarrassed by or whatever, you know. And so part of what you're doing is you're trying on a lot of different personas, and eventually you're trying to figure out, well, which one seems like the most honest pathway into who you really are. But the way you find that out sometimes is by going down the dishonest pathways. So, and I did that too, so. Okay, last question. Make it a good one.
I noticed you referred to yourself earlier as a broker of the text as a composer. And I noticed it's a very, very interesting word choice, not arbiter, communicator, translator. I'm curious as to if you might be able to go into a little more detail about what that might imply in terms of your role as a composer in relationship to the texts which you set.
Yeah, I think I'm going to back up and say something larger since this is the last question, but it gets there. For me, the greatest gift about being a composer, the thing that is the absolute best part of our job, right, is we get to spend a lot of time by ourselves with ourselves, you know. So I get to go into my studio and close the door. Actually, in my apartment, I'm the only person who has a door that closes. I go into my studio, I close the door, and I get to spend 8 hours or however long I'm doing it just thinking about how I feel, right? I can write 3 notes on a piece of paper and I can, sing it to myself and think about it all day and go, how does that make me feel, right? I'm spending the entire day trying to figure out, how to micromanage my own emotional life, which is an awesome responsibility. And it's also the great gift of our job is that if we do it right, we get to know who we are and what we feel. When I'm working with a text, that's what I do, is I get to go into my studio and read the text 1,000,000 times and really think about it and really get to understand it and really get to know how I react to it, And that to me is an unbelievable responsibility because you're taking something that's already written down, either by you or by someone else, and you're trying to make those things meaningful to yourself and to someone else, and you're trying to use the music to find out what the core message of those words actually could be. And so I feel like when I am working with text, I have a responsibility to the text. And I have a responsibility to use the music to help communicate what that thing is to you. And so to me, that's a very different thing than just thinking, well, yes, I have a little fancy dance, and it could be 2 minutes or 3 minutes, but you've never heard it before, so you don't know which one is right. With text, that doesn't work, or it shouldn't work, right? With text, I want to make sure you get it. And if you don't get it, if it didn't mean something, that means I didn't do my job right. I didn't go deep enough into it. I wasn't honest enough with it, or I wasn't a good enough translator of it. Anyway, so I'm going to be talking more, hard to believe, during this week. So I'm sure you will hear me blather on about other things. But thank you all very much.